Step into the shadows of Greybriar Forest, a place where whispers lure the lost and the trees remember every secret. When you enter, the forest doesn't just watch. It chooses. Will you escape or become part of its endless song? The wind had no voice until it entered the forest. Outside its borders, it was a simple breeze, a whisper through the grass or a gentle sweep against rooftops. But within the twisted, ancient trees of Greybriar Forest, the wind found its voice. An eerie, low moan, sometimes rising to a scream, sometimes mimicking whispers that didn't belong to anything living. Most folks in the nearby town of Elmsworth knew better than to venture past the ironwood fence that separated the last home from the treeline. Some even hung rusted bells along their windowsills, said to chime in warning when the forest stirred in the wrong kind of way. But there were always exceptions, those who didn't believe, those who mocked the stories, or worse, those who were curious. It was this kind of exception that 17-year-old Clara Monroe fell into. Clara didn't believe in ghost stories. Not really. She had read her fair share of horror novels, spent enough time on late-night forums discussing cryptids and urban legends. But there was always a part of her that demanded proof. Real proof. And Elmsworth's obsession with Greybriar Forest had always irritated her. Every Halloween, the same stories were passed around like cheap candy. Travelers who went in and never came out, phantom lights weaving through the branches, screams in the night, the tree that supposedly bled if you touched its bark. Clara found it theatrical, even charming in a small-town way. But believable? No. Her skepticism had often put her at odds with her grandmother, Edith, who had raised Clara after her parents died in a house fire when she was 8. Edith had lived in Elmsworth her whole life and warned Clara never to go near the forest, even refusing to walk on the side of the street closest to it. That's how it had started, really, with Edith. Or more precisely, with Edith's sudden change in behavior. It began subtly at first. Forgetfulness, the occasional murmur to someone who wasn't there. Clara chalked it up to age. Her grandmother was 84 after all. But then the drawings began. Crude sketches in pencil and ink, left on the kitchen table or crumpled in the waste bin. Always the same theme, trees. But not the kind you'd find in a child's coloring book. These trees were malformed. Their trunks warped like they were melting, their branches crooked and jagged like broken fingers. And there was always something between them. Black shapes, almost humanoid but stretched and eyeless, often drawn multiple times on the same page as though they were circling something unseen. At first, Clara had assumed her grandmother was reliving nightmares from long ago. Perhaps something from her childhood. Trauma often resurfaced in the elderly. But when confronted, Edith would either wave it off or become oddly evasive. "They're not dreams," she said one night. Her cloudy blue eyes focused on the dark window as if she could see past her reflection into something watching from the yard. "They're memories." It was a strange thing to say. Clara tried to joke it off, asked if she had drawn inspiration from the local legends, but Edith didn't smile. Instead, she took Clara's hand in hers, which trembled slightly and felt cool despite the warmth of the kitchen. "Promise me you won't go into Greybriar," she whispered. "Not for dares, not for proof, not for curiosity. If you hear someone calling you from the trees, it isn't anyone you know. If you see a path that wasn't there before, don't follow it. And if you smell roses, real strong roses, you turn around and run." Clara laughed awkwardly, thinking her grandmother was finally starting to believe her own nonsense. But the look in Edith's eyes, panicked, urgent, almost tearful, haunted her long after they said goodnight. She didn't go to the forest that week, or the next, but then Edith went missing. It happened on a Wednesday. Clara had returned from her part-time job at the library to find the front door wide open, no lights on, and the smell of something sour in the air, like spoiled milk or flowers left in water too long. The sketchbooks were gone from the kitchen. So was Edith's coat. Her shoes were still by the door, oddly enough, and her reading glasses were on the floor beside her favorite armchair. There was no note, no sign of forced entry, but the back door was also open. It led to the narrow yard behind the house, where wild grass had overtaken the garden beds, and beyond that, Only 50 yards of meadow separated the property from the looming wall of Greybriar Forest. Clara had called the police. A search was launched. They brought dogs, drones, even heat-detecting equipment. But not a single trace of Edith was ever found. No footprints. No broken twigs. Just a soft trail of pink rose petals, scattered loosely between the back steps and the forest's edge. Some of the officers noted it but didn't treat it as significant. A neighbor suggested it might have been part of a prank or decoration that blew in from somewhere. Clara, numb with confusion and guilt, said nothing. After that, things spiraled. People in town started avoiding her. At first it was subtle, shortened greetings, averted eyes. But then came the rumors that maybe Edith had gone mad, or that Clara had done something. The townsfolk wouldn't say it to her face, but the message hung in the air like smog. She became isolated. Even her co-workers at the library treated her with that cautious politeness reserved for people who might snap at any moment. It wasn't fair. She missed Edith more than anything, and more than that, she felt responsible. If she had only stayed home that day, if she had taken the warnings seriously. It wasn't until a full month after Edith's disappearance that Clara found the journal. It was tucked behind a loose plank under the floorboards in Edith's room, beneath the bed frame. A black leather-bound book, small enough to fit in her palm, bound with a tiny brass clasp. It wasn't locked. Inside were entries dated back to 1963, all written in her grandmother's delicate handwriting. But these weren't typical diary musings. They were observations, descriptions, names, dates, warnings. The entries mentioned the echoing man, the birch maiden, and something referred to only as it, always in quotation marks. There were drawings, too, similar to the ones she had found weeks earlier, only these were older, faded, but just as disturbing. One page was a detailed map of Greybriar, with certain paths marked in red, others crossed out entirely. Beneath the map were 3 words, "Don't follow song." She read every word, twice, then a third time, as disbelief slowly dissolved into a grim, growing certainty. Edith had known something, not just believed. Known. That night, Clara dreamt of trees, tall and blackened, pressing close, branches cracking like bone. She heard a voice, rasping, high-pitched, but somehow also beneath her feet, calling her name from the dark. Not yelling, not screaming, whispering. She woke up soaked in sweat. Her sheets smelled faintly of roses. The next morning, Clara made her decision. She packed a backpack with a flashlight, a notebook, 2 bottles of water, and a camera. She printed out the map from the journal and folded it into her pocket. Then, just before sunset, she walked across the meadow behind the house and stepped into Greybriar Forest. The change was instant. The air grew heavier, cooler. The light dimmed. Not gradually, but like someone had twisted a dial on the sky. The trees were taller than she remembered, their bark a sickly gray-brown, their leaves a mix of green and crimson, despite the summer heat. A scent hit her like a slap. Roses, but old, rotting. Her stomach turned. She nearly stopped, nearly turned back, but a faint crunch behind her made her freeze. She looked over her shoulder. Nothing. Only the meadow beyond the trees, bathed in amber light. She kept walking. The deeper she went, the more the forest changed. There was no wind, but the trees creaked like ships at sea. She passed a tree with hundreds of tiny claw marks on its base. Another with a doll's arm nailed into its trunk. There were no animal sounds. No birds. No insects. Only the soft crunch of her footsteps and, occasionally, what she thought was another set behind hers, always pausing when she did. She followed the map, or tried to, but the forest didn't seem to obey the rules of space. She'd walk straight for 5 minutes, then find herself back at the same clearing with the hollow stump. A marker she'd passed twice already. The second time she found it, there were bones in the stump. Small, delicate, human-like. She turned around, and that's when she saw it. 50 feet ahead, between 2 trees, something moved. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, too thin. Its limbs were long and black, like dripping ink, tapering into needle fingers. It had no face, No mouth or eyes. Only a smooth, shifting surface that seemed to pulse when it turned toward her. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her voice was gone. Stolen. The thing tilted its head. Slowly. As if curious. And then it whispered. It didn't speak out loud. It whispered into her bones. Into her lungs. Into the space behind her eyes. And in that moment, Clara understood exactly what her grandmother had meant. If you hear someone calling you, it isn't anyone you know. Clara stumbled backward, her spine pressing against the rough bark of a tree as the thing took one long, deliberate step forward. It didn't move like a human. It glided, its arms dangling unnaturally low, fingertips almost brushing the ground. Even though there were no visible eyes, she felt it watching her, not just looking, but studying. Its form shimmered slightly in the fading light, like it wasn't entirely solid. More like it was painted onto reality and someone was trying to peel it off. Then it tilted its head again and stopped. Its shoulders rose, as if inhaling, and the scent of roses intensified, thick and choking, almost syrupy in Clara's nose and throat. She gagged, tears forming as she backed away from the tree, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break her ribs. That's when the thing raised its arm and pointed. Not at her, past her. She turned slowly, breath-catching, half expecting to see another monster behind her. But there was nothing there. Just a narrow trail that hadn't been there a second ago, winding deep into the woods like a fissure torn into the forest floor. It was unnatural. Edges too smooth, the dirt too dark, like it had been freshly dug by invisible hands. When she looked back, the creature was gone. Vanished. No sound, no motion. Not even a broken twig to suggest it had moved. The air seemed thinner now. The roses were gone. But Clara's knees trembled as if gravity had doubled. She wiped her eyes, hands shaking, and stared at the path again. It had to be part of it. Whatever it was. The story. The trap. Clara reached into her backpack and pulled out Edith's journal. Flipping to the map. The path wasn't on it. But a word near the center caught her eye. Scrawled in red ink underlined several times, false ways. The surrounding entries described people stepping off the mapped trails, usually following lights or sounds, only to disappear. One path becomes three become none. The forest eats indecision. She almost laughed. It was ridiculous, insane. But here she was, standing in the middle of a place she'd spent her life calling a fairy tale, now watched by something that could not be explained. She had two choices. Stay on the marked path and risk going in circles again, or follow the new trail and find out where the creature had wanted her to go. Her fingers brushed against the camera clipped to her backpack. Even if she died, maybe someone would find the footage. Maybe someone would believe her. She stepped onto the new path. Instantly, the air changed again. Heavier. The light faded faster than it should have. Trees leaned inward like skeletal guardians, and the path beneath her feet became sticky in patches, as if sap or blood had soaked the earth. She kept her flashlight off to conserve battery, but within 5 minutes, the darkness forced her to turn it on. That's when she heard the music. Faint at first, a single note, held too long, like it came from a bowed string played by someone with no sense of rhythm. It grew clearer as she walked. Other notes joined it, disjointed, haunting, and wrong, like a lullaby played backward through broken speakers. She couldn't tell where it came from. It echoed strangely, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Then came the whispers. At first, they were layered into the music, barely audible. But slowly they pulled apart, becoming individual voices. She couldn't understand what they were saying. The words were in a language she didn't know, yet her brain almost understood it. Like a forgotten dream struggling to be remembered. Every few minutes, a new voice would join, some pleading, some mocking, others repeating the same phrase over and over like a scratched record. She kept walking. Eventually the path opened into a clearing. At the center was a well. Stone, cracked and moss-covered, it looked impossibly old. Around it were dozens, no hundreds, of wooden totems planted into the ground like grave markers. Each carved differently, some with faces twisted in agony, others with mouths sewn shut or eyes gouged out. A few had names etched into their surfaces. Clara stepped closer, brushing away dirt from one of them and freezing when she saw her grandmother's name. Edith Monroe. Her throat went dry. She knelt, shaking, and read the second line etched beneath the name. Called at dusk, answered at dawn. She looked up, suddenly aware of just how quiet it had become. The music was gone. The whispers gone. The only sound now was her breathing, and the soft creaking of wood above. Above, Clara slowly turned her head upward, flashlight beam climbing the trunk of the nearest tree. That's when she saw them. Bodies, dozens of them, hanging like grotesque fruit from the branches. Some fresh, some skeletal, swaying gently in a breeze that didn't exist. All dressed in clothing from different eras, Victorian coats, 70s flannel, modern jeans, and hoodies. Some were missing limbs. Others had faces turned upward, mouths frozen in silent screams. And all of them had totems below. She backed away slowly, fighting the bile in her throat. Her flashlight flickered. A soft snap echoed behind her. She turned. Someone stood at the edge of the clearing. At first, she thought it was the creature again. But no, it was a woman. Thin, pale, with long silver hair and a torn floral dress stained at the hem. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Her mouth slowly opened. "Clara," she rasped. It was Edith, or something wearing her skin. "Run," the figure whispered, voice warbling like a scratched record. "Run now. It's waking. It knows your name." Clara stumbled backward, heart thundering. "Grandma!" The figure twitched violently, as though the word caused it pain. Then its jaw unhinged with a sickening crack, gaping wider than humanly possible. And from within came another voice, deeper, layered, echoing. "We never forget those who come willingly." The totems began to tremble. The ground cracked near the well. Black roots, slick and pulsing, burst from the dirt and began coiling upward around the stone. Clara turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going. The path behind her had vanished. The trees shifted, dancing around her like they were alive. The roots chased her, writhing through the soil, snapping at her heels. She tripped once, scraping her knees, but scrambled to her feet, lungs burning. The forest was alive now, breathing, groaning, every tree a watcher, every branch a claw. She screamed for help, but her voice vanished into the mist. The light from her flashlight barely pierced the shadows now. Her map was gone, torn from her pocket, or maybe it had never been there. And then, just when she thought she couldn't run anymore, she saw it. A wooden sign nailed into a post. Old and rotten, barely legible, but the words burned into her brain like fire. "Return not by path. Return by blood." What the hell did that mean? She didn't have time to think. The trees ahead parted slightly, revealing another trail, a narrow, downward path that shimmered faintly with red light. With no other choice, Clara plunged into it. The moment she stepped forward, the ground changed. Softer, wetter, a sucking sound beneath her feet. The light grew stranger, no longer red, but more like the inside of a closed eyelid, the glow of blood through skin. The smell of roses returned, overpowering now, sweet and sick. And then, the whisper again, that same voice from before. But this time it didn't call her name. It asked a question. "What will you trade to leave?" The question reverberated through her like a drumbeat inside her skull. "What will you trade to leave?" Clara stopped dead in her tracks. The air shimmered with heat, or maybe with something else, something wrong. Her breath fogged in front of her, even though her skin was slick with sweat. The trail beneath her was soft and uneven, the red glow pulsing faintly as if the path itself were alive and breathing beneath her feet. She stood in silence, trying to steady her thoughts. The forest around her seemed to listen. Another whisper came, closer this time. "You already brought the offering." A cold finger of fear traced down her spine. What offering? She hadn't brought anything. Just a flashlight, a camera, some water, and her fingers touched the edge of her coat pocket and stopped. The journal. Edith's journal. She pulled it out slowly. Felt heavier now. Warmer. The leather cover, once smooth, now had strange ridges beneath the surface, as though something was pulsing inside it. She flipped it open. The pages were different. No longer handwritten. Now they were filled with tight, small text in a language she didn't know but that felt wrong just to look at. The ink shimmered faintly in the red glow. One of the pages curled on its own, peeling upward to reveal a single phrase written in her grandmother's handwriting. "You'll find me at the roots." Another line beneath it. "But the forest will take something first." Her breath caught in her throat. That was the deal. The question wasn't rhetorical. If she wanted to leave, if she wanted answers, if she wanted to find Edith, she had to give something up. Something real. She closed the journal, looked down the path. The light grew stronger the farther it went. Warmer. More vibrant. Not like blood anymore, but like firelight dancing against a wall. She began walking again, slowly, her shoes sinking into the soft ground with each step. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by invisible fingers. The air throbbed with unspoken words. After a few minutes, the forest around her began to shift. The trees grew farther apart. The branches above twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Arches, spires, spirals that defied gravity. Strange markings adorned the trunks, like tribal symbols or runes, glowing faintly in rhythmic pulses. She passed what looked like a stone table, cracked and moss-covered, with rusted chains embedded into its surface. A child's shoe sat on top, bleached white and filled with black moss. She didn't stop. Eventually, the trees parted, revealing a massive clearing. At its center stood a tree unlike any she'd ever seen. Towering, gnarled, its bark black and slick like oil. The roots stretched outward in all directions, some as thick as tree trunks themselves, others spiraling into the sky like tendrils. It wasn't just a tree. It was the tree. The one from the stories. The one people whispered about on the edge of sleep. The waking tree. And hanging from its branches were bodies. Not like before, these were alive. Their limbs twitched occasionally. Some mouths moved in silent prayer. Others cried without sound. One figure, near the bottom, turned her head slightly. It was Edith. Clara broke into a run. The moment her foot hit the root line, the air solidified. Not literally, but it felt like she was pushing through honey. A pressure wrapped around her chest, thick and suffocating. Her legs moved like they were underwater. Her ears popped, and a low hum rose around her, vibrating the ground. Still, she pushed forward, stumbling through the haze until she reached the base of the tree. Edith hung 5 feet above her. Her eyes fluttered open. "Clara," she whispered, barely audible. Her lips were cracked, her skin paper-thin, but her voice was real, alive. "You shouldn't have come." Clara reached up, tears flooding her eyes. "I had to. I didn't know what happened to you. I thought—" "Listen to me?" Edith gasped, her hands twitching against the vines that bound her wrists. "It doesn't let you leave for free. It never lets you leave for free. It offers freedom, but it takes something. That's its nature." "I'll give it anything," Clara said without thinking. The moment the words left her lips, a ripple of wind surged through the clearing. The tree groaned, low and guttural. The humming grew louder. Beneath her feet, the roots pulsed. "Anything?" a voice asked. Not Edith's, not human. It came from the tree itself. The bark shifted, forming shapes. Faces, hands, eyes, all writhing across its surface. "Yes," Clara shouted. "Take whatever you want. Just let us go." The roots responded immediately. One coiled upward from the ground, thin and sharp, like a black vine soaked in tar. It slithered up her leg, cold as ice. Clara didn't move, didn't fight. She thought it would take a limb, maybe a memory, maybe years off her life. But the tree had other ideas. The vine pressed against her chest, just over her heart. It stayed there, unmoving, for a full minute. Then it pushed. Pain exploded through her body. She screamed, falling to her knees, clutching at her chest as a burning sensation tore through her ribcage. The forest spun around her. Her vision blackened at the edges. The voice came again. We will take your blood, but not your life. We will take your truth, but not your mind. We will take your name. Your name. She tried to speak, to protest, to ask what that meant, but no words came out. Her mouth moved, but no sound followed. The pressure in her chest grew unbearable. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. She collapsed, gasping. The vine retracted. The tree quieted, and the bindings around Edith's wrists snapped like twigs. Clara crawled to her feet. Edith fell into her arms, sobbing softly, skin cold and trembling. You fool, she whispered. You beautiful, stubborn fool. You gave it what it wanted. I'm fine, Clara said, or tried to. Her mouth formed the words, but again, there was no sound. Edith pulled back, her face pale. You can't speak. Clara nodded. No, it didn't take your voice, it took your name. That means, Clara, you don't exist anymore. The wind around them stopped. The hum faded, and the tree began to sink. The roots coiled inward. The clearing shuddered. The faces in the bark disappeared one by one. The branches pulled upward like claws retracting. The tree folded into itself, slowly vanishing into the earth, leaving behind only a hollow depression in the soil. Clara stood in silence, watching. Her body still hurt, but not as much as her mind. It was like something vital had been removed, some anchor, some definition of self. She felt lighter, too light. When she looked at her hands, they were pale, almost translucent at the edges. Edith held her tightly. We have to go. Now. They left the clearing. The forest didn't stop them. No more shifting trails. No more whispers. Just the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet as they followed the old path out. Took them hours. Maybe longer. Time had no meaning in the woods. But eventually, they broke through the tree-line, stumbling back into the meadow. The sky above them was bright, dawn, or dusk. Clara couldn't tell. Their house stood ahead, small and distant, untouched. Edith cried when she saw it. Clara didn't. She couldn't cry, couldn't speak, couldn't write. The price had been paid. Back home, Edith refused to speak of what happened, not directly. She kept Clara close, treating her like glass, hovering constantly, flinching every time the girl stepped near a window or stared too long into the trees. Clara tried, in vain, to explain what she felt. The loss, the hollow. She still breathed, still moved, still lived. But everything felt unmoored, like a boat cut loose from its dock, drifting silently out into the night. She couldn't speak, couldn't write, not because her hands didn't work or her mouth didn't move. Something deeper had been severed. Her grandmother said it best one evening, while sitting on the porch with a mug of untouched tea clutched in her wrinkled hands. You don't belong anymore, Edith said quietly. Not to this world. Not entirely. Clara tilted her head, questioning. Names are more than just labels. They're anchors, threads that tie your soul to your body to the world, and your memory to others. When the forest took your name, it didn't just make you silent. It made you forgettable. Clara stared at her, confused. People will stop remembering you, Edith explained, eyes shining with grief. You'll fade, little by little, like a word erased from a book no one reads anymore. Not just from minds, but from records, from photos, from time. Clara reached for the old family photo on the nearby table. Her hand trembled as she looked at it. There was Edith, young and vibrant, her parents smiling, and next to them, a smudge, a place where someone should have been. She knew that was her. She could feel it, but her face was gone. She flipped through old albums, her school records, her emails, all of it the same. She hadn't just been silenced. She was being erased. The days passed, then weeks, and the effect grew worse. At the library, her boss walked past her without a word. Her coworkers glanced at her with confusion, like they knew they should recognize her but didn't. At the grocery store, people brushed by her in line, never making eye contact. Once, she even saw her reflection fade briefly from a mirror, just for a moment, but long enough to send her reeling. Only Edith remembered her. Only Edith said her name. And then, she stopped. Not on purpose. Not by choice. It happened slowly. A moment of hesitation. A pause before saying dear, instead of Clara. One morning, Edith knocked on her bedroom door and asked, "Miss, are you?" She stopped herself. Her eyes clouded. Her face crumpled with horror. Why don't I remember your name?" she whispered. Clara tried to answer, but there was no sound. No voice. Only tears. They held each other in silence that night. The next morning, Edith wrote something on a card and placed it on the kitchen table. It read, "Your name is Clara. You are my granddaughter. Don't let me forget." She started wearing it like a locket, pressed close to her chest. It helped for a while, but only for a while. Soon even that wasn't enough. Edith became confused, distant. She began asking who Clara was, why she lived there. Clara would point to the card, to the photo, to the empty bed she'd always slept in. But the proof faded too. The ink blurred. The photographs degraded. One day the card was blank. The next, Edith was gone again. This time for good. She didn't disappear like before, not physically. Her mind did. She no longer recognized the house. She stopped speaking. The doctors said it was advanced dementia. Clara knew better. The forest had taken its price, but it was still hungry. And with Clara's anchor gone, it was feeding. Clara tried to fight it. She tried everything. She left notes, recordings, video diaries, posted online. But the files corrupted within hours. Her image blurred. Her voice muted. Even strangers on forums stopped replying. It was like she never existed. And then the final sign came. One morning, Clara woke up and looked at herself in the mirror. She wasn't there. Not a smudge. Not a blur. Just nothing. She could see the room behind her. The sink. The towel rack. But her own reflection had vanished entirely. She reached out and touched the glass. Cold. Real. She was still there. Somewhere. But she didn't belong to this world anymore. That night the wind picked up. The trees swayed violently outside her window, though the air in town was still. The chimes on the porch rang out. A soft, sorrowful warning. And then she heard it. The voice again. Not calling her name. Just beckoning. Come home. Clara sat down at her desk, took the last working pen she had, and wrote a single sentence in Edith's old journal. One line that somehow, impossibly, stayed inked long after all her other notes faded. I traded everything to save her. Then she closed the book and stepped out into the night. No one saw her go. No one remembered her leaving. No one remembered her at all. The door was left open. The wind passed through the house. The chimes fell silent. And in the distance, deep within Graybriar Forest, the roots stirred beneath the waking tree. The forest had no memory, yet it never forgot. Deep beneath the roots, where light could not reach and sound warped into vibrations of breath and bone, the waking tree stirred once more. It did not sleep, not truly. It dreamed while open-eyed, fed by those who wandered in, those who were lost, those who gave too much. It thrived on sorrow and silence, on the brittle edges of memory that splintered under time. And now it had Clara. But unlike the others, unlike the hundreds of names buried beneath leaves and bark and time, Clara did not fade. Not completely, because Clara had given freely, not out of fear, but love. She had answered the call not with desperation, but with purpose. And though the forest devoured names, consumed voices, and drank memory like a thirsty god, it remembered her. It wanted to remember her. That was its mistake. At first, Clara drifted in the place between, the liminal stretch of not quite death, where the forest keeps its trophies. Her body no longer aged, but neither did it rest. Her thoughts were fragmented, like pages of a burnt book. She walked the paths with no end, the roots beneath her whispering old stories in half-formed tongues. Faces flickered in the bark, some familiar, some monstrous. She passed by dozens of others like her, faded, mouthless, hollow-eyed, but none of them looked at her. because they couldn't see her. She was the nameless one, a shadow with no tether. And yet, she could see them. In her silence, Clara began to observe. She watched how the forest shifted, how its paths rearranged based on fear, regret, or curiosity. She watched how those newly drawn in, teenagers with flashlights, hikers with faulty GPS, desperate lovers searching for legend, were tested, tricked, and trapped. The waking tree did not always take all at once. Some were allowed to leave, altered, sickened, bearing cursed knowledge. Some gave up their reflection. Others lost their shadows. Some never realized they'd left part of themselves behind. But Clara understood now. She understood the pattern. She began to follow them, not to save them at first, but to witness. And in time, her memory returned. Not entirely, but in flashes. Edith's voice, her own laughter, the feeling of pen on paper, the pain in her chest when she said, "Take whatever you want." It was in those moments that Clara changed. The forest watched her with a new kind of interest. It sent its creatures after her, the faceless walkers, the howling echoes, the birch maiden whose kiss could shatter memory. But Clara didn't run. She couldn't be frightened anymore. She had nothing left to lose. One day, deep beneath the twisting canopy, where the air hung thick with spores and time dripped like resin from the leaves, Clara found the roots of the waking tree again. They spiraled downward into a sinkhole of wet stone, their bark like bruised flesh, pulsing faintly. At the heart of the roots sat the book. Not Edith's journal, but the book. The one she'd only seen in glimpses, hinted at in whispers. Bound in flesh, inked in ash, heavy with the weight of forgotten names. It was the ledger of the forest. She touched it, and it opened for her. Page after page flipped on their own. Thousands of names, each etched in a different hand, some shaky, some furious, others almost childlike. Every one belonged to someone the forest had claimed, but none of them were hers. Until now, the last page bled ink from its center, forming letters that dripped downward like tears. It wrote itself slowly, deliberately, Clara Monroe. Then below it, traded voice, traded name, refused to vanish. More ink spilled beneath the lines. New words formed. We cannot keep her. The ground shuddered. The roots recoiled. The book snapped shut. Clara stood in silence, but the forest roared. The waking tree howled like 1,000 mouths split open at once. Roots flailed. Branches cracked. All around her, the world unraveled just a little. And then she was back, standing outside the tree line. No dawn, no dusk, only gray. She was not in her body, but she was real. A shadow, a flicker, an echo walking backward through time. She did not speak, but she moved. And when someone entered the forest, when someone stepped off the path, lured by whispers or lights or loss, she followed. And sometimes she warned them, not in words, in feeling. A chill at the nape of the neck, a sudden change in wind, a whisper that sounded not threatening, but pleading. A figure in the distance who disappeared when you blinked, standing with one hand raised, silently saying, "Stop." Most didn't listen, but some did. Some turned around. Some left. They never knew who or what had helped them. They forgot the shape, forgot the moment, but they left the forest whole. Because of her, Clara, the girl with no name. The forest had taken everything. But in doing so, it had created something new. A guardian, not a ghost, not a victim, a witness, a reminder that the forest is alive, and it is always hungry. But sometimes it regrets what it eats. The forest was never supposed to be this dark, not the way Mara remembered it. As a child, the edges of Greybriar had seemed almost inviting, sunlight spilling between trees, the scent of pine and earth promising adventure. But tonight, the trees loomed like blackened sentinels, swallowing every sliver of moonlight until the world was nothing but shadows and whispers. Mara's breath came out in ragged clouds, despite the summer heat. Her flashlight flickered weakly, the batteries nearly dead. She cursed herself for not bringing more. Ahead, the path vanished into a thicket so dense it seemed to pulse with movement. Twisting vines, thick undergrowth, and branches that looked like grasping fingers. She stopped, listened. Only silence, except for the steady thump of her heart. 3 hours earlier, she had been at the campfire with her friends, laughing, telling stories, daring each other to come closer to the forest's edge. They had all heard the legends, the disappearances, the strange lights, the forest song that could lure you to your doom. But it was always just stories, right? Or so they thought. Now Mara was alone and lost. The first warning had been the voices. Soft at first, like children playing far away, then closer, echoing through the trees. They weren't speaking any language she recognized, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, almost pleading. She had tried to call out, but her voice had broken. Her friends were gone. The second warning was the lights, flickering like fireflies in impossible patterns. Circles, spirals, then a line leading deeper into the forest. Mara should have ignored them. She should have stayed on the path. But something inside her, a mix of fear and hope, pushed her forward. Now, standing at the edge of the thicket, she felt it. The forest was watching, waiting. A shiver ran down her spine as she stepped into the shadows. The air grew colder. The soil beneath her feet softened, like walking on moss thick with decay. Every step brought a new sound, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, something breathing just beyond sight. Her flashlight illuminated twisted roots, patches of moss that seemed to shift in color, eyes that glinted briefly before disappearing. Mara forced herself to keep moving. The stories she had scoffed at flashed through her mind. Tales of the echoing man, who mimicked voices to lure travelers. Of the birch maiden, whose touch froze hearts. Of the waking tree, which fed on memories. She didn't believe in any of them. But here, in the growing darkness, she wondered. Ahead, the trees opened into a clearing. Moonlight spilled in pale and cold, revealing a stone altar cracked and covered in moss. Around it, strange symbols were etched into the earth. Circles, triangles, and lines that seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight. Mara stepped closer, drawn despite herself. The air thickened. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then she heard it. A voice, soft, melodious, and haunting, calling her name. Mara! The sound wrapped around her like silk, warm and inviting. She spun, searching for the source, but saw only shadows. The voice called again, closer this time, whispered through the leaves. Come to me? A cold dread crept over her, but curiosity anchored her feet. She stepped toward the altar. A sudden gust swept through the clearing, and the symbols flared with light. From the shadows emerged a figure. Tall, slender, draped in tattered robes that shimmered like mist. Its face was obscured, but the eyes glowed with a pale blue light. It raised a hand, beckoning. Mara's breath hitched. What are you? She asked, voice barely a whisper. The figure smiled. A slow, terrible curl of lips that revealed no teeth. I am the guardian, it said. The keeper of promises. The voice in the dark. Mara took a step back, heart pounding. Why are you calling me? To choose, the figure replied. To trade. To become part of the forest song. Mara's mind reeled. Before she could respond, the figure reached out, and the forest around her seemed to close in. Branches curling like fingers, shadows twisting and reaching. She tried to scream, but the voice whispered again, softer now. Will you join us, Mara? Or will you leave forgotten? The choice hung in the air like a blade. Mara's flashlight died, and the forest swallowed her whole. Darkness engulfed Mara like a thick, suffocating blanket. Her lungs burned for air, but the shadows pressed closer, tightening, weaving through her fingers like smoke, seeping beneath her skin. For a moment, she felt herself slipping. A leaf caught in a stream, carried helplessly downstream into oblivion. But then, just as panic threatened to swallow her whole, the cold grasp softened. The figure's voice returned, low and hypnotic. Do not resist. The forest chooses those who belong. Mara's eyes adjusted slowly, shapes emerging from the black. The altar, now glowing faintly, pulsed with an eerie light. The ground beneath her feet thrummed as if alive. "Belong?" she whispered, trembling. "I don't belong here." The guardian tilted its head. "All who enter belong whether they know it or not. The forest is patient. It waits for you to answer its call." A flicker of memories flashed through Mara's mind. Her friends laughing around the campfire, the warmth of the firelight against her skin, the comfortable certainty of home. She wanted to hold onto those moments, to cling to reality. But the forest sang a different song. Branches above rustled, whispering in tongues she could almost understand. The earth pulsed beneath her feet, heartbeat matching her own. Somewhere, deep in the shadows, a melody began. A haunting tune that wove through the air like smoke curling in the wind. "Why me?" Mara asked, voice barely audible. "Why now?" The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and the smile deepened. "Because you heard the song. Because you answered." Mara tried to move, but her feet were rooted. The forest had claimed her. She fell to her knees. The altar's light bathed her in cold radiance. Symbols shimmered on the stone, ancient and unknowable. Her fingers brushed the surface, and a sudden jolt shot through her veins. Visions flooded her mind. Faces she had never seen. Voices she could not place. Places twisted and impossible. The forest's history spilled into her consciousness. A tapestry of lives woven and unraveled beneath its branches. She saw those who had come before. The lost hikers, the children who vanished, the wanderers who never returned. All part of the forest now, their memories trapped in endless loops, their voices joining the eternal song. Mara gasped, overwhelmed. The guardian knelt beside her, voice softening. "Trade and you join them. Refuse, and you become forgotten." A whisper lost in the dark. Her heart thundered. She didn't want to be a prisoner, but she didn't want to disappear either. "Is there no other way?" she pleaded. The figure's gaze held hers, unblinking. Only one. A hand extended from the shadows. A small wooden totem, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Take this," the guardian said. "Carry the forest's mark. It will protect you for a time." Mara hesitated, then grasped the totem, cold and heavy in her palm. The moment she touched it, the forest's grip loosened. The branches retracted. The shadows receded. She staggered back, gasping for breath. The guardian's smile faded. "But beware," it warned. "The forest does not forget. The mark is a debt to be paid." Mara looked down at the totem. A flicker of hope mingled with fear. She was still here, still alive. For now. The forest whispered behind her as she turned to flee, its song echoing in her ears. "Return soon. The song never ends." Mara ran. Branches clawed at her clothes and skin, their rough bark leaving scratches that bled warm trails down her arms and legs. The forest seemed to close in behind her, the shadows lengthening like creeping fingers intent on pulling her back. But the wooden totem burned cold and heavy in her hand, a talisman against the dark. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she plunged through brambles and fallen leaves, her only guide the pale light of the fading moon overhead. The path she had entered on was gone, consumed or hidden by the forest's restless hunger, and every direction looked the same, tangled, dark, endless. The whispering song followed her, faint but persistent, threading through the air like an unseen current, tugged at her mind, promising comfort, release, surrender. A lullaby for the lost. Mara shook her head, willing herself to resist. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the path ahead, fast and silent. She stopped, heart pounding. The forest held its breath. A figure emerged, a young girl, pale and translucent, with eyes too wide and too dark. Her clothes were torn and stained with dirt and something darker. She reached out a hand, beckoning. "Mara," the ghostly child whispered. "Come play with us." Mara's fingers tightened around the totem. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not one of you." The girl's smile twisted, a shadow of sorrow and hunger. You will be soon. The forest always wins. Behind the apparition, more figures appeared, hollow-eyed, silent, moving like echoes of lives long ended. They circled Mara, their touch like cold smoke against her skin. Fear surged, but Mara clenched the totem and closed her eyes. A sudden warmth spread from her palm, flooding her veins. The totem pulsed with light, casting a protective glow around her. The spirits recoiled, shrieking in voices like broken glass. The clearing shook. Roots writhed beneath the earth, reaching upward like serpents. The guardian's voice echoed through the trees. You bear the mark. You belong. But Mara's resolve hardened. I belong to myself, she whispered. The light from the totem flared brighter, blinding the forest shadows. The spirits dissolved into mist, the singing fading into silence. When she opened her eyes, the clearing was empty. The night was still. Mara dropped to her knees, exhausted but alive. But she knew the forest had not forgotten her. The totem's warning echoed in her mind. The debt unpaid, the promise made. She had been marked, and the forest was waiting. The days that followed were a fragile truce. Mara returned to town, to the semblance of normal life. But the weight of the totem in her pocket was a constant reminder. It was more than a talisman, it was a contract. A tether binding her to something ancient and unforgiving. She tried to forget, to move on. But the forest had other plans. Every night, the whispers returned, soft and coaxing, threading through the edges of her dreams. The song of the forest, now a haunting melody that played beneath the hum of daily life. She heard it in the rustle of leaves outside her window, in the sigh of the wind, in the silence between heartbeats. Mara's friends noticed the change. Her laughter was quieter, her eyes distant. She stopped answering calls, stopped going out. The forest had taken her piece by piece invisibly. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Mara stood at the edge of town, staring back toward Greybriar. The trees seemed to watch her, ancient and patient, waiting for her to return. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. The forest remembers. Her skin prickled. She looked around. No one was there. She tried calling back, but the line was dead. The next day, strange things began to happen. Objects moved on their own. Doors creaked open, lights flickered, shadows lingered where none should be. In the woods behind her house, trees bent as if breathing, roots writhing beneath the soil. Mara felt eyes on her wherever she went. Strangers in the street glanced at her with empty smiles, then looked away quickly. She was becoming a ghost in the world of the living. She knew the debt was coming due. Late one night, as the moon hung low and heavy, Mara found herself drawn back to the edge of the forest. The totem burned in her hand, warmth spreading like wildfire up her arm. The guardian was waiting. This time it wore no robes. Its face was clear, beautiful and terrible, eyes like deep pools of night. You carry the mark, it said softly. Now you must pay. Mara swallowed hard. What do you want? The guardian extended a hand, and from the shadows emerged a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. It unfurled to reveal a heart, pulsing and bleeding, dark as night. To balance the scales, the guardian whispered, something must be given, a truth, a sacrifice. Mara's breath hitched. She shook her head, backing away. No, the guardian's eyes flickered. You cannot refuse. The forest hummed with rising power, the trees leaning in like hungry beasts. Mara clenched the totem, feeling the cold pulse in her palm. Her choice was clear. To save herself, she had to give up something precious, something she was not sure she could bear to lose. Mara's heart thundered in her chest as she stared at the pulsing heart cradled in the guardian's hands. It wasn't just any heart. It was her heart, or at least it felt like it. The forest was asking for a sacrifice unlike any she'd imagined. She clenched the wooden totem tightly, feeling its cold surface bite into her palm. The weight of the choice pressed down like a stone. Tell me what to give, she whispered, voice trembling. The guardian's eyes shone like stars caught in midnight pools. A truth, the deepest one you carry, the one that binds you to this world. Only then can you be free. Mara closed her eyes, memories flooding in. Her father's disappointed face, the secret she'd kept buried for years, the guilt that shadowed her steps, the truth she'd never spoken aloud. She opened her eyes, determination hardening her features. "I'm ready," she said. The guardian nodded, reaching forward. Mara placed her hand over her chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers. The forest seemed to hold its breath. A brilliant light erupted, blinding and pure. She felt her truth unraveling, pouring into the earth, rising into the branches, becoming part of the forest's endless song. The guardian smiled softly. "You are free." But freedom came at a price. Mara stumbled back, gasping. Her body felt lighter, as though untethered from the weight of her past. But when she tried to speak, no sound emerged. Her voice was gone, taken by the forest to seal the bargain. The guardian's form began to fade, dissolving into the mist. "Remember," its voice echoed, "the forest never forgets." Mara stood alone at the edge of Greybriar Forest, the dawn breaking behind her, painting the sky with hues of fire and blood. She was free, but she was silent, and though the world around her carried on, the forest song lingered, a haunting reminder that some truths are never truly lost, only traded in the shadows beneath the trees. The first time Jonah heard the rumors about Greybriar Forest, he laughed them off. Ghost stories, folklore, nothing more than campfire tales meant to scare kids and thrill tourists. A forest like any other, thick with trees and mystery, but no more dangerous than the shadows themselves. But standing at the edge of those ancient woods, the weight of the night pressing down on him, Jonah felt the laugh catch in his throat. The air was too still, the darkness too deep, and the silence too complete. He glanced back at the worn trailhead sign. Paint faded, warnings barely visible. But it was enough to remind him that the locals called this place the Hollow, a name whispered with reverence and fear. Jonah was here for answers. His sister Lily had disappeared in these woods 3 months ago. No trace, no clues, just an empty campsite and a lingering sense of dread. Tonight, armed with only a flashlight and his resolve, Jonah crossed the threshold into Greybriar. The forest seemed to swallow sound, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of needles and moss. Every snap of a twig felt amplified, every rustle like a predator stalking unseen. A cold wind brushed past, carrying a faint scent, earth and decay, but beneath it, something sweet and sharp, like forgotten memories. He kept moving, deeper into the heart of the forest. Soon, the trail dissolved into a tangle of roots and brambles, forcing him to navigate by instinct and fading light. Then he heard it, a low, mournful hum, weaving through the trees. The song, the same haunting melody his sister had described in her last messages. Drawn forward, Jonah stumbled into a small clearing. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, revealing an ancient stone well, its edges crumbled and covered in moss. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air and into his bones. He peered into the well's dark throat. For a moment, the water's surface was still, a perfect mirror reflecting the night sky. Then ripples distorted the image, and a face appeared. Lily's face, pale eyes wide with terror. "Jonah," she whispered, lips barely moving. "Help me?" He reached out, fingers brushing the cold stone, but the reflection vanished. The forest shifted, shadows lengthening. Behind him, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in leaves and bark, eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "You seek what is lost," the voice rumbled, deep and echoing. Jonah swallowed hard. "I need my sister." The figure nodded slowly. "The forest holds many secrets. Some are gifts, others are curses." Jonah's grip tightened on his flashlight. "Tell me what I must do." The forest seemed to lean in, waiting, and the figure spoke. The figure's voice was like the creaking of ancient trees, slow and deliberate. "To find what is lost, you must give something in return." it said. A sacrifice of meaning. A price measured not in gold or goods, but in pieces of yourself. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest. What kind of pieces? The guardian, if that's what it was, stepped closer, the soft rustle of leaves accompanying its movements. Memories, names, truths you hold dear. The forest feeds on these fragments, weaving them into its eternal song. Jonah swallowed, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. My memories? My truth? The figure inclined its head. Yes, and sometimes more. Jonah clenched his fists. How do I know I won't lose everything? The figure's glowing eyes softened. You don't. But without sacrifice, the forest never reveals its secrets. Jonah's gaze dropped to the well. The faint shimmer of water reflected nothing now but darkness. He remembered Lily's last words, her fear, the way her voice had cracked. He remembered her smile in better days, the way she had always believed in magic and myths. And now she was trapped in this place, caught between the world of the living and the shadows. He had to try. Tell me what to do, Jonah said, voice steady despite the fear creeping through his veins. The guardian lifted a gnarled hand and traced a pattern in the air. Symbols appeared, circles intersected by lines, triangles nested within spirals, ancient runes that pulsed with a faint green light. Speak your truth, the guardian commanded. Offer a name you cherish. Give what you can bear to lose. Jonah hesitated, mind racing. He thought of his childhood, of laughter shared with Lily in sunlit fields, of secrets whispered in twilight hours, of promises made and broken. His voice caught. I remember the day I lost my father, Jonah whispered. I blamed myself for what happened, though I know it wasn't my fault. But I never told anyone, not even Lily. The guardian's eyes glowed brighter. Your truth is heavy, it said, but necessary. Jonah closed his eyes and spoke the name he had hidden away for years. James. The air shimmered. The ground beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. The forest sighed. Suddenly, the well's water bubbled and churned. From its depths rose a figure, Lily, but changed. Her eyes glowed with the same unnatural light as the guardian's. Her lips curled into a sorrowful smile. Brother, she said softly. You came. Jonah reached out, but she slipped beneath the surface again. The guardian stepped forward. She is caught between worlds, it said. To bring her back, you must enter the forest's heart. But beware. The deeper you go, the more you risk losing yourself. Jonah nodded, determination blazing in his chest. I'll do whatever it takes. The guardian motioned toward a narrow path winding into darkness. The way is not easy. The forest tests all who enter. But your courage will guide you. Jonah took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the flashlight, and stepped forward. The forest swallowed him whole. The forest closed around Jonah like a living thing, breathing, shifting, watching. The narrow path beneath his feet wound deeper into darkness, the towering trees blotting out the moon and stars. Each step echoed in the heavy silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or distant, haunting call of an unseen creature. His flashlight's beam cut through the shadows, but the light felt fragile, as if the forest could snuff it out with a breath. Jonah's mind raced. The stories he'd heard, the legends whispered around campfires, all warned of this place's power to twist reality, to steal names, memories, even the self. But he pushed the fear aside. Lily was out there, somewhere between worlds, and he wouldn't rest until he found her. As he walked, the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches scraping like fingers against the sky. Shadows pooled beneath twisted roots, and shapes flickered just beyond his sight. A flash of pale skin, a glint of eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam. He quickened his pace, the forest song rising in a low, haunting chorus that wrapped around him, threading through his thoughts. Suddenly, the path opened into a clearing bathed in silver light. In its center stood a ring of ancient stones, covered in moss and etched with cryptic symbols that pulsed faintly with a greenish glow. Jonah stepped forward cautiously. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, mingled with something sweeter, like the memory of a forgotten dream. From the center of the ring, a voice echoed, a soft, melodic tone that sent shivers down his spine. "Brother!" He spun around. There, just beyond the stones, stood Lily. But her form flickered like a candle flame, half solid, half shadow. Her eyes, glowing with that eerie light, held a sadness that pierced his soul. "Jonah," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm here, but I'm not free." He reached out, desperate to touch her, but his hand passed through her like mist. "The forest holds me," she whispered. "It's a place between worlds, a prison made of memories and shadows." Jonah's heart ached. "How do I get you out?" Lily's gaze drifted toward the stones. "You must give up your name, your story. Become part of the forest song. Only then can I cross back." He swallowed hard, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. "Is there no other way?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "The forest offers no bargains," Lily said softly, "but it listens to sacrifice." Jonah looked around the clearing, the stones seeming to pulse with life. The air shimmered with ancient power, waiting for him to decide. With a steady breath, he stepped into the circle. The ground beneath him hummed, the symbols glowing brighter. A wave of cold swept through his body, and memories flickered. His childhood, his fears, his hopes, slipping away like grains of sand through fingers. The forest song grew louder, wrapping around him, weaving his story into its endless chorus. Lily smiled sadly. "I'll see you on the other side." As the light engulfed him, Jonah felt himself dissolve into the night. His name lost, but his love for Lily eternal. When Jonah's senses returned, he was no longer in the clearing. Instead, he stood in a realm suspended between light and shadow, a twilight world where trees grew upside down, roots tangled with stars, and the sky was an endless canvas of swirling mist and muted colors. He tried to call out, but his voice was a hollow echo, carried away before it reached his ears. The forest had claimed him, but not as a prisoner, as a part of itself. Around him, figures moved, faces half-remembered, voices half-heard. Souls who had given themselves to the woods, woven into its fabric. They looked at Jonah with eyes both curious and sad. A figure approached, a woman with skin like bark and hair woven from leaves, her eyes glowing softly. "Welcome," she said, voice like rustling leaves. "You have joined the song." Jonah's mind swirled. "Where is Lily?" "She waits," the woman replied. "But to reach her, you must journey deeper. Face what the forest hides." With a wave of her hand, the world shifted. Suddenly, Jonah was plunged into a forest thick with mist, the path ahead obscured by shadows that writhed like living things. He took a step forward. Whispers rose around him, fragments of memories, laughter, cries, secrets long buried. Each step weighed heavier than the last, the air thick with sorrow and longing. From the shadows emerged shapes, twisted forms with eyes glowing in the dark, reaching out with grasping hands. Jonah felt their cold touch, pulling at his thoughts, trying to unravel his will. He clutched the totem he had found before, its warmth steadying him. "Your love is your strength," the woman's voice echoed in his mind. "Hold on to it." Summoning every ounce of resolve, Jonah pushed through the darkness, the whispers fading as he pressed on. Finally, he reached a clearing bathed in pale light. There, standing beside an ancient tree with roots tangled like serpents, was Lily. She smiled, radiant and free. "Jonah," she said softly, "you found me." He stepped forward, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then the forest exhaled. The shadows dissolved, the mist lifted. The two siblings embraced, the bond between them stronger than the forest's hold. But as they turned to leave, the woman's voice whispered on the wind, "The song never ends." Jonah and Lily walked side by side, their footsteps light but certain, retracing the path back through the twisted woods. The forest around them seemed calmer now, the oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a strange, solemn quiet. The ancient trees bowed gently as if bidding farewell, their leaves whispering a final farewell in a language only the wind understood. But the price of freedom was never truly paid. As they neared the edge of the forest, Jonah looked down at his hands. They shimmered faintly, edges blurred and translucent, as though part of him had been left behind in that twilight realm. He tried to speak, to reassure Lily that they were both whole, but his voice barely rippled the air, soft, distant, fading. Lily glanced at him, eyes wide with wonder and concern. "Jonah?" He shook his head, a sad smile touching his lips. "I'm still here, but not all of me returned." She reached out, squeezing his hand tightly. "We're together. That's what matters." Together, they crossed the boundary between forest and town, stepping into the first light of dawn. The trees behind them stood silent, shadows retreating into the undergrowth. The forest was still watching, waiting. Jonah glanced back once more. The leaves rustled, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard a voice, soft, melodic and haunting, a song without end. They would carry it with them always, and the forest would never forget.